with all that said, that's all my messages. That's all my messages. Niamh, I'm going to hand over to you and Brian for this morning's first bit.
Brilliant. Thank you, Stephen. First of all, I'd just really like to say a big thanks to Brian for agreeing to chat to us this morning. You're in for a real treat. If anybody's not familiar with Brian's work, he's a visual artist who works in painting and drawing and uses these techniques to manipulate like personal imagery, also found imagery right throughout history, and also like famous images as well. And we get to see some of Brian's work today. We'll be sharing it as we're speaking about it as well. But I really just want to highlight to you that you can also go and see his work in person, because there's an exhibition currently with the University of Atypical, and it runs from 10th of September right through the 23rd of October. So there's still a few weeks to see that. So go down to Royal Avenue if you get a chance in Belfast and go and see the exhibition. Without further ado, we'll get started, Brian. And sort of the first thing that I'd really like to ask, going back to kind of the start of your journey with your practice and its relationship to mental health and really your time in university, if you'd like to speak a bit about that, because we know really that students really struggle with mental health while they're studying. Like I have a figure here, USI survey from 2016 shows that 78% of students had experienced mental health issues. So could you speak a bit about your own experience of this, and how it was for you when you were studying art?
Thanks. Hello, Niamh. Hello, Stephen. Hello to everybody. Happy World Mental Health Day. Yeah, the experience in uni was very strange for me, because I'd always struggled with like self-doubt and low self-worth and anxiety as growing up. But 2008, 2009 is where I sort of everything came to a tipping point, and I was diagnosed with clinical depression and anxiety. But like I say, I've always had issues with it, but within a short, maybe 6-7 months period of time, I lost several people very close to me, whether that be from cancer, suicide, car accident. I think it was just like that snowball effect, and it got to the point where I just couldn't cope anymore. And being in university at that point, being from the middle of nowhere, which Stephen thankfully pointed out, the city was still relatively new to me. And so I sort of threw myself into art and into the university studio process that they have there. And I practically lived in the ballroom for a year. Like I would go in at 8:30 in the morning, stay to maybe 6, come home, have some dinner, and then I would just go back in again to maybe 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. Not every day, but there were nights where I would just to take my mind off things, I would just go in and just keep busy, just do something. Mm-hmm. But it took like the friends I made in university are friends for life for me, and they were really instrumental in talking to me about it, helping me talk about it, breaking down those barriers, and making sure that I realized that I wasn't alone. I wasn't that I could seek help if I wanted it. And there was a point where I didn't want it. I didn't want to acknowledge that there was something wrong. So I've been medicated since then, up and still am, and I've been to counselling and psychotherapy in and out for the past 11 years. But it's taken so long to build down those barriers and to be able to talk about issues openly. I think even maybe 2 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to talk to you now like this about it.
Yeah.
I've still been quite closed off, which can only it can only be a good thing. To be able to talk openly, as
Yeah.
Bob Hopkins used to say, it's good to talk.
Definitely. I definitely take what you're saying there as well. You know, that started at that time, but that's an ongoing thing, breaking down those barriers and having those conversations. It's not kind of a conversation that you have at that time and that's it. It's something that,
Yeah.
it's constantly, still going on and
Yeah.
still
And sometimes a barrier might build up when you're building, when you're in the process of taking one down, another one might be without your knowing. So it is an ongoing process. You have to alter your mindset accordingly. But you can get through it. That's the thing. You can live your best life. You can, there's always light at the end of the tunnel. You mightn't see it, but it's just around the bend,
Yeah. No, I think that's going to be, really an important thing for people here, especially, anybody who's at that point where that's starting for them as well, and that they're starting to go through those, processes really. And I have a few images here for this question, Brian, if you want me to share, that you went and dug up from that time as well.
I can't remember what I sent you, but go for it.
I think you said you had to go find a phone from 2009 to
that's right. The first two photos are like from an old phone. I must have just done a dump at one point. So these are actually, I didn't really realize until I looked back that they were quite, they're darker now than what I remember. I just thought I was doing a study. But when I look back, I was like, what space was my head in? Is it taking a wee while to load up, is it?
Can you see from your side now?
I can see all of the images.
Oh, right, okay. No, sorry, I have it here. 2 seconds, I'll just try that again. Let's see. Okay. Sorry, I'll try that now. I could see it on my side, so should have checked that. Can you see that now?
Unfortunately, yes, I can.
Not unfortunately.
No, these were studies I did in second year. I think just before diagnosis. I think some friends of mine sort of said you might need to talk to somebody because even now, like my work would still be seen as a little morose, but there definitely wasn't much hope in those. It was very black and white. No pun intended. If you want to skip on to the next one.
Yeah. Can you see that next one?
I can indeed. So yeah, I think that was an image from the Second World War. I think it's funny though that the process is still there. Is the mixture of the charcoal and the oil paint. We'll talk about later. That was the origins of that, actually, those two paintings. So it is like the catalyst of what my practice sort of developed into, but just much darker and cruder and raw. And then if you want to go to the next one, on a lighter note, I actually didn't lift a paintbrush for a year after finishing university, because it's that sort of, what do you do now? What is there? So this was the first. It was like a wee self-portrait I did, and I was like, I think it was one of the first times I used vibrant-ish colors, because I think that was by that time, 2011. You know, things were on. I was more hopeful, and it's funny how things in your personal life just seep into your practice and can have an impact on it. And I haven't seen that one in ages either.
You know, looking at it now, it's bringing back, or you can see, what was happening then and how it was influencing what you're doing. I think that's really, it's refreshing to hear you say something that, that you hadn't done anything in that time after university, because I think that's, another really important point is whenever people finish that and right through education, and then they come out the other side of it, it is that moment of what do I do now? And I think especially for anything creative or artistic, because you have that space and time when you're studying to do that, and then when you come out the other side, it's almost like, okay, now go get a job, and you don't have that kind of time and space carved out for you anymore, or that identity as well of this is what I do as a student studying this.
I think I actually I think maybe because of my personal experiences with it and being so affected by that sort of post-uni bubble burst, I think I wrote a little blog post on my website about advice to students. I think the university actually they liked it and shared it, because it's just like you put I think sometimes some students can put a lot of pressure on themselves. It's like, right, I've got a degree. Now what? I should need to get a gallery. I need to do this. I need to do that. But I think it can be more beneficial just to take a step back and reassess what do you actually want to do, and don't beat yourself up about moving on to the next step straight away. It is an ongoing process. It's more vocational than climb the ladder right away.
Yeah. 100%. Well, that really chimes with my experience. Like, that's something I kind of would want to say to myself when I was coming out, like not that long ago, but something I sort of wish I, would have read even. And I'll find that and put in the Slack as well for anybody who would be interested to read that. It leads me on nicely to kind of the next question here, because I think, in sort of like formal education, there is that kind of pressure when you're being tested, or you're producing work for a deadline or for something, whereas like galleries and art spaces, they can offer us a chance for lifelong learning that isn't sort of under those kind of pressures, and that can new ways to explore and have opportunities that aren't actually in that formal education. And that was really my experience of coming on to project and being in museums as a participant, like after I graduated. But I was just wondering if you wanted to talk a bit about positive effects that those kind of spaces can have on our mental health. And I've got a picture here as well of your exhibition.
Cool. Well, I think lifelong learning is what it says in the tin, isn't it? It's lifelong. There's no quick, I know everything, here be's me. I know the whole enchilada. But like, I think lifelong, like going to the likes of creative spaces like galleries and museums, it's so important. It can help open up your horizons, look at different points of view. If you education shouldn't stop after school or university. Conscious learning is vital for I think for keeping you mentally active, good for your mental health, and also improving your craft. Like, for example, that analogy of practice makes perfect, it's not entirely true. oh, if you do 10,000 hours of painting, you'll be a Caravaggio. It's like, no, not really, because if you just practiced, say there's a graph, I'm going to do a graph with my hands here. So the time and skill. So if you practice, you'll get to a certain point and you're not learning anything new. You'll just sort of stagnate, go across. But if you practice, take a step back, reassess, learn something, go and see work, you go up, there's a little spike, and then you practice some more, and then that starts to ebb out, and then repeat that process. So it's like a stairs.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's taken me a few years to figure that out, where you can't just go in and hammer away and think this is gonna be groundbreaking, this is gonna be important, vital work. You need to constantly test yourself and challenge yourself to learn new things, question your own points of view sometimes, be empathetic towards other standpoints in terms of history and what have you, and how does that come into your train of thought. And then when you're learning different things, you'll see that progression of, oh, there's a wee spike, I know this little technique, or I found this out, and then you practice with that, and then, so yeah, it's like a staircase. I like to think of it as.
Yeah, like a combination kind of practice and the learning. And I definitely think that those kind of spaces, like, it allows us the time to be able to do that, and the right kind of environment to do that. Whereas I think, sometimes in other types of education, there's a lot more pressure on, and almost, no time to kind of allow for that kind of like reflection and that kind of learning that's going to improve what you're doing anyway.
Yeah, and it can apply to everything as well. It can apply to coding. It can apply to any field.
Yeah.
If you delve into research, and even just taking a break sometimes can be that contemplative break you need to get to the next step or get to the next stage.
Yeah, no, there's so many like benefits just that, like taking that step back. So I was very lucky. I was able to go and see your exhibition there recently, and I'd just like to recommend to anybody, if you get the chance, go in and see it, because it's not the same when you're looking just at the screen at the image. You actually have to go in and see how it's created and see the actual marks of paint to be able to appreciate it. And I really, really enjoyed the experience of getting to go and see this exhibition, especially, the time that it is, where I haven't been able to do this in a while. And also just, Brian, I think your work absolutely stunning. And if you'd like, no, you're very welcome. And if you'd like to talk just a bit about this exhibition that's currently running.
Well, Confessional is the name of it. It's sort of born out of a studio visit by the wonderful people at Atypical, and looking through the body of work, this notion of victim and perpetrator came in, and I hadn't really noticed it before. So that sort of idea of that binary is how we were able to just choose from the body of work that I'd built up over the 2 years from when I found out I was going to get a show there. In terms of curation, they work with that binary. So painting is the sort of the painting that's in the show. It does depict trauma. It does depict like sometimes historical elements of trauma, but also maybe slightly ambiguous, like personal elements. But painting is, I think, a physical act. And so like whenever I paint, like material is like applied on the canvas, it's drawn over with charcoal, it's scratched off and repeated over and over again. So like, I like showing like the shadows of that physicality, where you can see there was once, you know, a trace of a color here, and it's now been rubbed off. I think that leaves something to be said. And I think that physical act of painting and the removal of material can go in some way to get into the notion of depicting trauma across, like, on the canvas. And like another way the imagery was selected was like if it had like a personal or emotional connection to me. Like, can you go to the next image?
Yeah.
And the next one, can't remember.
Know the order of them?
Yeah. So like, yeah, the little sculptural piece there in the corner is a crown. It sort of goes hand in hand with the painting to the right, but it was actually the first sort of sculptural work I've ever really done. But me and my dad made that together because he would be very hands-on. He would do a lot of like bog oak carving. He'd be quite handy in that way. So I went to him with advice, but the work I had in my hand for the emotional trigger was actually of Rose West. I don't know if I've sent you that image.
Yeah.
But no, I haven't. But it has an image of the horrible Rose West, but in front of it is a rose superimposed on the front, and that rose is actually brought back from, it wasn't just like an image of a rose I found online. It was a rose that my dad brought back from Greece as a seed when he was doing work there. Oh, there it is.
See it now? Yeah.
Yeah. And
lovely art.
Thank you very much. And so that rose has like a personal element because my dad brought that back from Greece, like through time zones, and brought it up, and then he took this photo of it like back when there still was film, and it's something quite personal. And then just juxtaposing it with that sort of that horror of humanity that is Rose West. And obviously the only thing they share is the name. They can't be polar opposites. So like trauma, I think like experience is so subjective. Like, so it's not for me like to tell you or anybody what to see or feel when they look at the work. And I think that's the beauty of any creative practice, is like to have that and to be able to put forward that ambiguous engagement with the viewer. I think that's where the magic happens, because the viewer can take from it so much more, sometimes less, but so much more from what you would even have thought to put into the work.
No, I'd 100% agree with that, and that was my experience of going and walking around the exhibition. Like I really like hearing about you know, the personal elements of, you know, what you've put into each work. I also, you know, I sit and draw my own kind of meanings, or like as you say, the magic, you know, as well.
There is that double-edged sword where like sometimes maybe showing it or telling a little bit of that personal story can make the work more impactful, but then on the other side that can also maybe distract from what the viewer might want to take out of it. So I like to leave it, I like to sit on the fence.
Yeah, I feel there's room for both, almost. Like I do feel there's room for both. I even just wanted to ask a bit about like your process of collecting images, because, you know, I find there's a tie here nearly between our project, what we do. So reimagine, remake, replay. It brings young people into museums. So we're going in and looking at collections that are, you know, already set out by museum, you know, what they deem, you know, has historical value or has some social value, and then we're kind of taking these collections but bringing our own personal ideas to them and bringing our own personal interpretations. So I was just wondering, you know, whenever you're mixing your personal collection with, you know, what you pick out as historical or found images, you know, like, you know, what is it you're looking for? What is happening in your process of doing that kind of?
Well, I'm a real hoarder of images, and I don't discriminate. They come from film stills, newspapers, magazines, personal photographs. I draw from life as well, but like one of the main inspirations for this sort of magpie, like is Marlene Dumas, the painter, and she has files upon files upon files, and she has, I think she's got an assistant that like categorized them all into like, you know, male heads, female heads, you know, hands, what, you know, different categories. And mine just nowhere near as tidy as that. It's just like a shelf. But like, I think the image, if it's not a personal image, which obviously would have a personal thing for me, an image that I work with needs to resonate with me personally, or emotionally, or like strike up a memory of an event or a person or a place. If you want to go to the next drawing, I think
maybe the back the way. Was there any of these ones? Or
oh yeah, keep going back.
Going back.
Yeah, please. Way ahead.
Or the other direction.
There we go.
There we
That's
go.
us now. So yeah, like this one is, oh, who's ringing me? They can wait. I'm busy. Got a new smartwatch. I was like, people ring me. I'm like, no. This sketch is a found image. It's just like from a fashion magazine. But it really struck a chord with me because of this act of the t-shirt in the mouth, because whether it's an anxiety thing, and you actually need to check, no, I don't have any today, but I have a real tendency to eat my clothes. So yeah, people laugh at this, but it's I don't know if it's like an anxious thing or it's like a nervous twitch or something, but like one of my uncles used to call me a moth or Mothman, so that's why I call this drawing Mothman, because it's like see the drawings there, it still hasn't been developed into a painting yet. I think I'm kind of scared because it makes me conscious of that tick I have. So a wee bit dubious about it, and then makes me want to eat clothes. So yeah, that's one of the things I look for. If something just strikes a chord with me, if something reminds me of something personally, either for me or somebody I know, that's the sort of imagery I gravitate towards. And like the photo, you can see that's pen. So the photo, like the process of going from a drawing to a painting is, I would do a sketch out in pencil. Once it looks semi okay, I go over it with pen. Mainly because it helps with the next stage, which is to then transfer it onto acetate, and then that sketch on the acetate gets projected onto the canvas. So that sort of that immediacy of working small, and in a book you can sort of be a bit imperfect with it. That can sort of sometimes be translated onto a larger scale. And and in the editing process, I like to sort of dumb down what I think is relevant or interesting. So in this, one of the eyes is literally just a little squiggle because it was in shadow and you couldn't see it much. So I didn't want to make it too realistic or put too much detail in, because I think less is more sometimes. And then whenever I do paint it, then it, like I said before, it's now jumps between the drawing process with the charcoal and then the painting, and back and forth and scraping and messing up and trying to get it back. And yeah.
Yeah, I think that's something we're going to come on to now a bit more as well, is your technique. I just wanted to highlight, because we have a few comments in the chat I haven't been able to read out yet. Rosie says, so she's also a hoarder of images that inspire her, so she's glad to hear she's not the only one.
Oh yeah, it's quite common.
Yeah, no, I think that is fascinating, and kind of what you said there about like seeing something reflected back to you in the image as well. I think that's so interesting. And Grace, she used to eat her hair, so that's resonating with people too, seeing that. Like the text, I suppose, is what you said there, and like the visual elements of that. And just a few comments from earlier as well. I'll just call out now. Anne made a comment here about it's about turning your negative into a positive. I find that with my anxiety and depression, I put a lot into my short films. I feel better after it, a little drained, but to art or paint is how we open up. And then, and thank you so much for sharing that, and that, like, you know, really resonating with what we were saying there about education elements and kind of what art can provide for us in those kind of processes. And then Rosie has said it's lovely to see visually how your journey instantly translates into your work. And I think that was when I was showing those images, and you said about the brighter colours and, you know, picking up the paintbrush again then. And Rosie says, I can relate a lot as I struggle with depression as well as anxiety. I do textile art and use it as a creative outlet.
Yeah, it's something that definitely helps that process of contemplation and just reassessing your mindset. So yeah, I can completely empathize with Rosie there.
So I just want to ask a bit about your technique. So I suppose this is, you're going to go on to then the process of painting, and like I find that really interesting when I was looking at your images, like the way paint is layered and like almost that, like you used the word physicality earlier, and that was kind of like the exact word I was looking for to describe the experience of seeing that. So if you wanted to talk a bit about that process and your technique.
Yeah, cool. Do you want to go to the next image? So yeah, this is a little drawing. Can you hear a car?
Just a wee bit. No, it's all good.
It's okay. This is an image that I found online. No, in the magazine actually. Sorry, the car put me off. And it was really striking. As I've actually worked from different photos of this series, because I like that crown piece I was talking about earlier. That was sort of inspired by like sort of mythology in terms of the Greek tragedies like Sophocles. So there's that. I like to sort of bring in that historical or mythological narrative in it sometimes. So I just imagined this man and this ferry, which was just in this random like fashion magazine shoot. It was like the ferryman going over the river Styx. So I did a painting of it actually. It's in lockdown. It's the same size as this one, but it's a portrait. And then I had my accident, which we'll talk about later. And then this is like the sequel. And now I've done this one, and I'm like, oh god, that first one's terrible. I need to go back and fix it. So this is the original, like the sketch I did. But I'm not sure if you can see the trees are different in this, because behind this painting was a failed piece. But the only bit that worked that I liked was this sort of weeping willow in the background. So I was like, why don't I, like that process of the acetate transferring on is really easy to move the composition about, get it the scale right, or to whatever scale you're working on. So I was like, why don't I keep the willow, get rid of these row of trees that's in the drawing, and just have the willow and then incorporate the man on the boat. I was like, okay. And so it's like that sort of, the painting before that, it's I overpainted it, and you come because of like a reliance on drawn elements can be a hazard when you use charcoal and paint and charcoal, because you can take a step back and it can be quite illustrative. If you want to go to the next slide. I don't know why I sent you this photo because
it's right there.
But yeah, but you can sort of see the sort of I had to alter the angle of the boat just to fit in with the canvas. It's quite a big one. So overpainting can be an issue, like the piece with the willow before this one. So it's really important to take a step back. And if you want to go to the next slide, Niamh, please. And yeah, this is just another example of the drawing process with the developing onto the painting process. It's an image of a great uncle who was hospitalized. I think the photograph was taken for evidence because an orderly broke his wrist, I think. But if you want to go to the next slide, you'll see that the change, like the drawing elements are still there in the bed, as opposed, but there's still painterly aspects. Like I just like that play of which mark is going to come to the fore, which one is going to work best for an object, which one's going to work best for flesh or depict shadow. So if you want to go to the next slide. And so yeah, it's just a close up of that sort of trying to get that balance between the drawing mark and the painting mark. It's something that excites me and terrifies me at the exact same time, because as I said, it can go really, really right, and then it can go into an illustrative, cartoony thing, which is just not the aesthetic that I'm looking for. So you want to go to the next slide, please?
Yeah.
Oh, so yeah, no, this is I was going to talk about the painting technique. Sometimes I use multiple imagery, like with the rose west and the rose, but sometimes the orientation changes because changing the orientation, I think, can help with that sense of ambiguity and leading you into a story like a fictive narrative. Or have you ever seen the film Rashomon?
No.
It's an old Japanese film from 1950, and it tells the story of these several people who witnessed this event, and it tells the stories of from each person's perspective of the same event, but they're all completely different because of their own personal bias or their own personal selves. So this image is the main portrait is a still from a Joan of Arc black and white film from the 1920s, and then the orientated other way is my mother and my older sister in Portland Forest in 1982, and the Joan of Arc film was made in 1928. So it's just sort of switching the numbers around. It was kind of weird. But I think that turning that around, and if you didn't know what they were, it keeps the door open for interpretation. Is this portrait, is she thinking of somebody she's lost or somebody she misses? there's that, it's just like a little breadcrumb to bring somebody, what is this person thinking? But as well, the multiple imagery, it's a tool. It's something I don't want to rely on too much, because sometimes a standalone image is strong enough. I think, like your man on the boat, is strong enough to stand on his own or row on his own gently down the stream.
Definitely, but I do definitely like agree that that technique of you using the found imagery and combining these different images, like there's something about that naturally opens up them different narratives and leads us into that like really, really well. Like I think there's something really work about that, and like people are going to respond to. I think something just when you were talking about painting and then your process and this kind of phrase you're using about overpainting, I had read on your website you talking about that and talking about, like, as you say, that it terrifies you almost, like, you know, that finding that balance between painting and overpainting. And I find that really refreshing actually to hear you talking about that and like write so honestly about like your own doubt and about your process, because I feel like that's kind of part of that, or the side of that we as, you know, viewers or someone coming to the exhibition, we're not really privy to, we don't hear about. So I thought it was really interesting to actually hear you say that, and you know, kind of makes me think as well of you writing a blog about, you know, how you should feel when you finish uni and you're not sure what to do. So I was wondering about like how that makes you feel actually writing that, because a lot of like what we touched on yesterday was kind of how we use social media and how that can make us feel, you know, in certain versions of ourselves out there, and you know, it kind of seems like you should only have a perfect or a certain version of yourself, but you seem to be quite honest and quite open with the way you talk about making your art.
Yeah, it's really weird. I only realized like a few months ago that like people have priv accounts on Instagram, and I'm like,
yeah,
what? I struggle with one. Let alone trying to balance two, and then like, oh my god, who's seeing this and who's seeing that? That's just flew over my head. But the blog is a sort of hangover. Well, I'm never too far from my little reflective diary, as I call it, which is where RDH comes from in the blog. So actually, somebody typed in, did a Google search with like Brian Kielt, what does RDH mean? Because I'm so ambiguous. I never told people what it means. Reflective diary highlights, because I literally every month I go through my little diary or notebook I have, and I highlight points, notes, ideas that are relevant, or something I need to go back to, or something that's of note. And that's what the blog is. Essentially, it's just my daily diarrhea on page of what am I thinking that day, what's happened that day, oh my god, I've nearly ruined this painting, here's an idea for this drawing, da 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 da. So that's a hangover from uni, of trying to be that, of trying to just keep the mind active every day. And it goes back to that idea of active learning, of just, even if I didn't, like say when I had my accident there a few months ago, the first few weeks I was not allowed in here. I was not allowed to stoop. So I literally I wrote, because that's all I could really do. Thankfully, I didn't fracture my writing wrist, but like looking back, yeah, the diary is just essentially a tool for like developing and moving forward. Even though you're looking like in the recent past, just a month, you're like, okay, you can sort of see little traits of things you're doing that's leading you in the wrong direction, and then you know to nip it in the bud sooner, because you recognize the telltale signs. So yeah, it sort of helps you recognize like little traits where you start to be going downhill, whether that's on a personal level, like with mental health wise, or on a professional level. Sometimes even a Chinese order goes in that book. It's the closest thing to hand. It's, you know,
Yeah.
I'm not fickle with what goes in it.
Yeah. I think it's a brilliant hangover, like, you know, from your time at university, like for yourself, as you say, like as a reflective process and getting you into that way of active thinking. But the fact that you have it for people to read and see, like, I think that's that about it, you know, it's something that then can show other people that, you know, that could be something for them, like to help them. And as you say, like there's a personal element to it there as well, where you can see, you know, with your mental health. And I know that people find that useful as well as writing things down. And we have a question here from Joe in chat, and it says, Ryan, you mentioned earlier having fear of speaking out on your mental health challenges in the past, and it's great to see how confident you are in speaking out on it now. Would you have any advice or tips for others to overcome those barriers and fear of opening up?
Oh, that's a good question. I think whatever fears you have in your head, someone has heard it before. You know, you're not gonna shock anybody by exposing this deep, dark, terrible secret or something you have. Someone there'll always be somebody, whether it's a health professional, will be able to say, look, that is okay, that is completely normal. You're not alone in it. You don't have to be alone. There's always a point of reaching out. And I think you can get into that gray area of no one will understand. No, the people will understand. And yeah, I think it's taken me a long time to realize that. And I think it can only be a good thing. Even now, I think even just doing like this chat is beneficial even for me, because like I said earlier on, like a couple of years ago, I would never have dreamt of doing this.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I am nervous. You can't tell, but I am nervous. Thankfully, you can't tell.
I can't tell, and you've no need to be nervous. Like it's been
no, I know that's the thing. People have this. There is a fear of speaking in public. That is a genuine thing. But it doesn't have to be in public. You can just take somebody aside and just say, look, I'm really struggling. You mightn't even realize, you mightn't even know why you're struggling or what the cause is or underlying issues. You just need to reach out and ask for help.
Yeah.
Because there's been too many people that haven't and are not here anymore. Like more people have died from suicide since the Good Friday Agreement than they have through the whole Troubles. Yeah. And that's just it's insane. Sorry.
No, you're 100% right. You're 100% right, and right to say that. And it really is something here. So thank you so much. And I can't say enough how important this is, you speaking in this way. So, you know, thank you so much, Brian. And I'd also just like to highlight as well, we have resources as well in Slack there if people you know, feel that they want to access some support, absolutely like avail of those, and 100% for saying that, Brian.
It's funny crying, but it just reminds me of like I said before about having like anxiety issues before the whole tipping point. I used to cry on a sixpence in school over like somebody, it's just a little change, and it got to the point where like there was I cried that much that the ones in my class made up a song about me called Brian's Crying, and then that made me cry.
Naturally enough.
Yeah, Brian's crying. Yeah, that's how it went. There was no other words. It was just that, and then that would just get me so not angry,
Yeah,
but kids do silly things when they're younger, so I
exactly.
don't blame them.
You can see how that would be enough to set you off. Thank
Yeah.
you so much for everything you've said there, Brian.
It's all right.
I-
No, I'm just realizing social media. You asked about social media. Like the diary is a tool, and social media can be a tool, but there's traps. You
mhm,
can't fall down. You can't fall down like a rabbit hole.
mhm,
Um, and you need to learn. I think I've learned to limit certain platforms. Like I only really use Instagram or Twitter, and there's just too much juggling. And I think it's good to have a play about, see what you like, what works for you. But for good documentation purposes, I use Twitter and Instagram mainly, but also mainly Twitter for engaging with the art community in Northern Ireland and abroad. And like
mhm.
um just it just even in this pandemic era we're going through, being able to reach out, being able to have you guys here is great.
Yeah,
Being able to reach out and to say, here, look, this is what I'm doing, or what do you think of this? You do have little crits. And if you don't ask, you don't get. With social media as well, I think
that's it.
if you open up and um, if you open up and you sort of ask for advice, there'll always be somebody that'll say, yeah, sure, I can help
Yeah,
with this.
yeah. There's two sides to it, really, and I think that's kind of what we were saying yesterday about making it work for you, because there's definitely, negatives, and you have to learn that balance. But when you're there, there are so many positives as well that you can avail of, and that kind of community definitely. Um, I was wondering as well if you want to just mention a bit about the role that University of Atypical has played in supporting your work, and just like with the exhibition, but just in general, like with funding and stuff. And we do have a talk and a session tomorrow, and you'll be able to hear more about this. But so if you want to say anything about it, Brian.
Yeah, well, Atypical have been fantastic. In 2018, I was awarded their IDA, which helped get my website off the ground. And but prior to that, we in my old studio group, Loft, we did a drink and draw with them in 2015, and I spoke with the CEO, Chris Ledger, about my practice, and she suggested applying for funding, and I was initially hesitant. And that was what, 5 years ago. I was like, am I going to be taking this funding away from somebody who really needs it? Like, am I in that bracket? And it took a few years to realize that at that point it was nearly 10 years of being diagnosed and being medicated, that it has had an impact on my life. It does affect how I live and how I see the world. So um, I I applied, and I'm so glad I did. But University of Atypical were great. There was no pressure, and I think the shame was lifted as well, because I think accepting yourself can take a lifetime. Sometimes it can never happen.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but also learning to realize that you have worth. Everybody has worth. Um, and as an artist, you're doing work that people want to engage with, or it may have an impact on somebody. It's the best feeling. And I can't be more um, I can't be more thankful to Chris, who is sadly no longer with us, and to University of Atypical for saying, you know, it's okay. You initially hesitant about it, but we can see something here that needs developing and needs nurturing, and they've been gold. They've been just gold dust. It's been really good.
That's brilliant
And
to hear.
And as I say, like, I think I was saying earlier on before we went on that my old secondary school teacher used to say, if there's nothing, if you like your own work, then there's no point doing it. You just give up. And I always had that idea of like, oh, I don't like my own work. I need to push forward. And I can see that idea, but I am quietly really happy with the show and Atypical. I think it's they've done an amazing job there and have been so good to me and to others in the disabled and deaf artist community in Northern Ireland, pushing for advocacy, and they've been amazing.
You should be really proud of the exhibition, and you know, as you said there about, you know, them developing with you and nurturing your work, and now we're all witnessing this work here and being moved by it. Like, there's comments here in the chat. Rhoda said, so relatable on so many levels, Brian, you're great, and really feeling inspired now to make work. And if anybody wants to hear more about University of Atypical and what they provide, you can hear more about that tomorrow. I think that's really me wrapping up questions now, Brian. I think we could open it up. Anybody wants to type in any questions or any comments, and I can read them out here from the chat. But like, there's things here already. Rosie had said, "Thank you, Brian. Thanks for showing us your art and telling us your journey of mental health and being real about it." So I think everyone's really appreciating that honesty and openness, definitely. But if anybody wants to put anything else in their work away, I just wanted to ask just a small bit about your work in managing Loft and kind of that side of your practice, because you had a role there in organising spaces and facilitating those art spaces, for a community sort of way. And that's something that we're really interested here. So how can young people go about doing that, and like any advice you'd have around that?
Yeah, well, Loft was a wild ride. We got the space literally before we even left uni, but as I say, I didn't lift the brush because I was just trying to find other avenues, but I was trying to make this space work at the same time. And it sort of came about of just trying to find a studio space to keep that bubble, that university bubble, alive after graduating. And so like we just was like-minded people in our year and from a few years below met up, and it was a real shoestring budget. It was, the rent was really cheap because the space was not overly ideal. It was literally a loft. It was like an old attic. It was like there was nothing in it. There was a water tank in the corner, cobwebs everywhere. I think it took 2 weeks for me to sweep all the dust. It was that thick on it because it hadn't been used in years. So it's finding those wee spaces, which are sadly just everything's being pushed out of the city centre at the minute. But the drink and draw event actually just started with like mates hanging out, bringing a wee carry out up to the studio at night, and here I'll pose, and then drinking and drawing essentially. But it's just grew into this beast. Like, I know COVID has stopped them now, but they will be back. So I haven't lived in Belfast for a few years, so it's I've sort of taken a backseat with them, but there are other members of Loft that have carried the torch and have been really great, like holding them in other events and other venues. God, the name's escaped me, of the bar at the town square. Is that on Botanic, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then sometimes there'll be like a drag drink and draw, like in the Maverick bar. So hopefully they will make a comeback. So, like Loft, yeah, that bubble kept it going for long after it really should have, because we started doing a drink and draws like 2012, and then word of mouth just spread, and then other people says, "Oh, we've seen photos of your face. It looks great." It is a sort of like people doing it. Like there's a music video up there. There's a couple of, like, what do you call the Welsh comedian? Is it Rhys Jones? Or he came up and did a BBC documentary up there about a band. So there's like a music video. There was a documentary film there. There were gigs. Comedy nights were a regular thing. We had a photography club as well. Open studios with other organisations. Visual Artists Ireland and the Belfast International Festival some years. Culture nights. We tried to do something every year. Exhibitions, and I did a podcast for a while. Loft Talk. I didn't need a voiceover for it. Loft Talk. But advice wise, like even with the social media thing I said earlier, if you don't ask, you don't get. If you reach out to organizations and stuff in your community, in your area of something you're interested in, somebody that has a skill that you mightn't have or be adept in, just try and take the initiative and make opportunities for yourself in that way. In this climate, I can see how challenging it can be, but I think where there's a will, there's always a way with it. So yeah, we were really lucky because where we were when we were, there was so many little art spaces so close by, really close proximity to us, where we could say, "Oh, here, do you have any spare chairs? We need some for tonight." Yeah, sure. Come on over and lift some chairs. And there was just that sense of community, which I think is really sadly gone now, because so many spaces have just upped and left, and they've had to move out of the city centre. So yes, I think it's building opportunities, engaging with. If you do an event, engage with the community you're in, because that is how you will have some sort of longevity. Longevity or longevity? Is it a silent G? I don't remember.
Potato.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be my advice, would be to be open, take the initiative, reach out, and if you don't know anything, ask somebody. Like I'm on that app you have, so if anyone has any questions, they can ask me on that. So more than happy to help.
Thank you so much, Brian. That's brilliant advice, and something I think like really participants in our project, like that sounds like really like part of what we're trying to do, and advice, really practical advice that we can take forward. And I think, as you say, with different art organizations being pushed out of the city, it is really important to have that community and to be working collaboratively together. So thank you so much. We have a few comments in the chat just saying, it's been amazing to hear what you're saying, and thank you so much. Just saying thank you for opening up, and we really appreciate honesty and the time. Well, yeah, everything that you said, it's been really inspiring, and chance to see your work as well for me has been really inspiring as well. So I would urge everyone to get down to University of Atypical and see Brian's work. But as you say, you're also
the very last photo. I think the very last photo you have is a little piece that's going to be in the Ulster Museum now, opening this weekend. So there'll be two opportunities. Yeah, there we go.
There we go.
I will be in 2 places at once for a while. If you want to have a wee look in there. And as I say, I was going to say as well, Atypical has health and safety policies open, so there's hand sanitation and social distancing, mask wearing through the space there, as well as obviously the Ulster Museum does as well. So that is a painting of my mother, and she has taken all the credit because I have applied for 10 years to be in the RUA, and this is the first time I got in. It just took a pandemic for them to say, okay, fine, let him in. But my mom's taking all the credit.
I'm sure she's loving that.
Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you so much, Brian.
No, thank you. This has been great.
Thank you. We've all the virtual clapping now.
Okay, I can't see.
Thank you, just because.
Oh, Brian, thanks so much. That was genuinely really incredible. Like it was, we tried to make.
I had a lot to live up to from yesterday, so
you did, and you managed it with like really exceptionally. Like it was just like so honest and like open, and like that's genuinely what I'd kind of hoped for this weekend. Just kind of refreshing, kind of honest conversations.